So I was born in Plattsburgh, New York, which is upstate, super close to Canada, but ever since I was 3 years old, I've lived in Casanova, New York, which is about 20 minutes outside of the heart of the city of Syracuse. My parents, my grandparents, and my aunts and uncles all worked in the city, and my grandparents had season tickets to every SU basketball game. I don't know if anyone in here is a fan, but I was. This is me, braces and all, with Paul Harris, and then this is me with Scoop Jardine when I was in 6th grade. I won a contest, and I thought it was like the coolest thing in the world. I thought Syracuse was like the coolest place, and as I grew up, I kind of still was with this idea, but I was starting to see, as I would pull towards the Carrier Dome and look to one side under the inner pass of Highway 81 and see, poverty and decay in the public housing, I would start to notice that maybe this isn't as great as it could be, and my grandparents would warn me when I would go to games with my friends and use their tickets not to stray, because Syracuse was dangerous, and even one street away from university you could get in very deep trouble. And this was taken at a Duke game, which had 35,446 people at. It sold out the Carrier Dome. And now when I look back, I wonder if 35,446 people can band together and root for a basketball team, and why can't we band together and make our city a better place for everyone to live in? In 1953, Syracuse was struggling with traffic problems. There was a lot of congestion in downtown Syracuse. They were having a hard time filtering traffic, so city officials and city planners sat down and drafted up a highway that would run north to south, south to north, however you look at it, through the city, and it would clear up this traffic problem. It was at grade with all of the other roadways in the city, and it was also the same width. It would connect other roadways in the city that were already there together, and there would be very minimal damage. It was a really efficient way to make the city an easier traffic flow. But when they proposed the plan to the state of New York said that they did not have enough money to help Syracuse out in building this. Syracuse itself pledged 50% of the project, but that still wasn't enough. But in 1956, Dwight D. Eisenhower passed the Federal Highway Road Aid Act, and it enacted over 47,000 miles of highway from coast to coast in the United States, and one of the cities was Syracuse. Interstate 81 was proposed with a counterpart, 690, which goes east to west around the city, and Syracuse was not a huge fan when it was first proposed. This was a raised roadway, the intersections were ramps, and it was also twice the size of any other roads in Syracuse. It displaced 1,300 people in the city, and it was a looming piece of infrastructure. In a 1978 doctoral dissertation given at Syracuse University by Dr. Jerome Allen Cohen, he described the unrest that was in the city after it was built, the leeriness that people felt. He quoted Mayor Anthony Henninger at the time as saying it would scar the city, and he equated it to sort of a Chinese wall, is how he explained it. It would divide the city in half. But what they didn't realize, or perhaps they did but didn't talk about, was how ideologically this would divide the city. These are 1937 red line maps of the city of Syracuse and its surrounding areas. So in the middle is kind of the heart of the city, and as you guys know about red line maps, where the red is considered, high-risk neighborhoods, people of color, low-income families, things like that. So this is a zoomed-in portion of the map that specifically focuses on the southeastern portion of the city. This is where Syracuse University is. This little bean is the Carrier Dome, and Highway 81 runs right here. So at the Adams and Almond Street exits, at that intersection, when you're going to the Carrier Dome, you can literally see under the underpass to the decaying public housing, to the epitome of poverty that is happening within the city, all of those things. And although Syracuse was very uneasy about the highway when it was built, there were no public documentations of any Syracuse officials talking about any racist or classal implications behind the building of the city. But there were other people across the country who also opposed these highways. Jane Jacobs, in her 1961 book, Death and Life of the American City, she was someone who was vehemently opposed to the modernist version of city planning. She said that it created unnatural urban spaces, it divided neighborhoods, and it failed to not acknowledge the humanity that was within the city, just like Syracuse. As I said, 1,300 people were displaced, and in addition, all of a sudden you were dealing with neighborhoods that were right along where Interstate 81 was built. They were right under the highway, and all of a sudden they had a much lower quality life than they had before. But just because Jane Jacobs was at the forefront of this movement, she was not the only person who was talking about these things. There were people of color who were talking about them, but they're not as widely publicized as Jane Jacobs because she was white. So it's really important to realize that even as these highways were built and they were opposed, they weren't necessarily opposed for all of the right reasons, and all of the voices who were most deeply affected by this were not usually heard. Now today it's really easy for people to say, racism is a thing of the past, we don't redline anymore, but as I said, where I-81 is built is a physical manifestation of the classist and racist ideals, and as you drive along Interstate 81 headed north and you look out the right side of your window, you see the Carrier Dome, you see Golisano Children's Hospital, you see restaurants that have been featured on the Food Network, you see a city teeming with life. There's brand new apartments, buildings meant to draw millennials in, there's new parks, there's art. And if you look out the left-hand side of your car, you can't even believe you're in the same city. There's rundown gas stations that people are living in, you walk through the streets, there's broken bottles and syringes. You look at the public housing and it's decaying, it's falling apart, there's bricks everywhere. The public housing is known, not in a good way, by people who live in and around Syracuse as the bricks. That's what my grandparents call it. It's known as a not good area. South Salina Street, a main artery of travel through the city, is somewhere where white people commonly lock their doors. We're told not to make eye contact there if you're driving there as a kid. And this is a picture of a house that is right on South Salina Street. And as you can see, they acknowledge the violence that is there. They acknowledge the problems that are within their neighborhoods. However, it's really hard to stand up and speak against these problems when your own city is working against you and continuously giving aid to the parts of the community that are already thriving and beautifying that, and sort of sweeping these communities under the underpass and saying, well, they have a low quality of life anyway because of their proximity to the highway. It's not high property values, that sort of thing. And this is another really big issue because the highway perpetuates environmental racism. It is not the only instance of environmental racism in the city. In 2005, there was a sewage plant that was proposed to go right in the middle of a neighborhood in the south side of the city of Syracuse. And as you can see, it's a low-income neighborhood. And in Syracuse, this is from the census, the 2005 to 2009 census. And this documents the percentage of people in within the city who are under the poverty line and are black. Syracuse, coming in at 65.2%, beats Detroit, Toledo, Rochester, Fresno, Buffalo, Cleveland. They were number one in 2005. For the percentage of their population who was under poverty and was black. And when asked about this, Paul Jagorsky in 2015, he's a public policy professor at Rutgers, said about the architecture that separates them, a durable architecture of segregation that ensures that racial segregation and the concentration of poverty is entrenched for years to come. We can see this because generation after generation are unable to leave the neighborhoods that are under the underpass. And in 2005, as I said, they proposed a sewage plant that was in a low-income neighborhood that was predominantly black. Aggie Lane was a woman who was born in the city of Syracuse, moved to the suburbs, and then moved back to this neighborhood. And after the sewage plant was proposed, she was very, very vocal, saying this wouldn't happen in the suburbs. It wouldn't be okay to build a sewage processing plant in a residential area that was predominantly white and high class. That just wouldn't be okay. So they formed what was called the City of Syracuse Southside Coalition, which the EPA called one of the most cohesive coalitions they have ever seen within a city, led by Aggie Lane, who was a white woman, and they went to the EPA and they pleaded a civil rights violation from the city of Syracuse, saying this neighborhood is black, this neighborhood is impoverished, this is why this is happening. There were no violations found by the EPA, so the sewage plant was built anyway. So this is a really important issue specifically now because Highway 81 is falling apart. It is no longer a feasible piece of infrastructure to accommodate the amount of traffic that it sees daily. Last year they did an annual study of how much traffic Interstate 81 sees, between 43,000 and 90,000 vehicles a day, depending on the season and the weather. That is a ton of wear and tear on the highway and it's falling apart. So to accommodate for this, there has been a lot of different proposals by federal, state, and city officials as different drafts how they can accommodate for the traffic through the city as well as accommodate for the people of the city, supposedly. So the three main proposals right now that have made it to this stage and are always the topic on public forums and are commonly voted on, and there's a lot of articles published about them, is one would be an underground tunnel that would run exactly where Highway 81 is right now, that would integrate the city on the grade level. They'd be able to build things where Highway 81 once was, but they wouldn't be able to accommodate the large amount of tractor trailer and truck traffic because it would be a tunnel. The second proposal is keeping the raised Highway 690 that goes east and west and completely eliminating a highway that ran through the city, replacing it with a boulevard. So something that would still provide a way to get from the north to the south of the city if need be, but it wouldn't be a main route of traffic per se when traveling long distances to run through the city of Syracuse. And the third option is to just fix the highway that's already there. This is the most expensive option, but unfortunately it's the one that a lot of people are pushing for right now. Why? This is because a lot of the people who are speaking out on this are not the people from the city of Syracuse, but rather the people who live in the communities that are outside of the city. Skaneateles is a small town that is about 20 minutes west of the city, and it is a very picturesque vacation, quaint town. It is the epitome of white elitism. The Clintons vacation there. The home that they once summered in went for $9 million on the market when it sold. Derek Jeter has a summer home on the lake, and it's just the epitome of a quaint, quiet, quintessentially white town. And when public officials held a forum against an option that would tear down Highway 81, they claimed that they did not want to eradicate 81 from the city because trucks would then reroute through the city and they would go through their small village. Why they didn't want that? The noise, the air, the light, all of that pollution that is associated with a highway. These are effects that the people who live in the city of Syracuse have been dealing with for decades, since it was built in 1950. The people in the neighborhoods around where the highway is have dealt with all sorts of pollution, all sorts of effects of this, from asthma to other illnesses that they are predisposed to based on their proximity to the highway. And this is the same thing that public officials don't want in their small white neighborhoods. Yet there's no public official whose voice is being, publicized in the newspapers, is being talked about and being followed by other, white elitist middle class to upper class people. None of them have proposed a plan that would ensure that no people had to feel the effects of this highway. There's no tangible, voiced empathy for the people of the city who have been living in these conditions for generations upon generations. This is really important to talk about because interstates are falling apart all through the country. They're very, very old, they're falling apart, and if done well, Syracuse could set a precedent as a city that was able to integrate based on race and class, as well as beautify for everybody and make it logistically more cohesive throughout the entire ideology of the city of Syracuse. It's really important because in 2017 this will be voted on, which is still not that far away from the 1937 red line maps. Those neighborhoods are still the same, and hopefully if they choose the best option and listen to the voices of the people who are in the city who are affected by this, then they can come to a solution that will help everybody.